So, may I have your attention? It's 7 o'clock. I think we'll get started. We don't want to get the reputation for starting late. My name is Phil Favero, and I'm with the Climate Stewards of Greater Annapolis, an organization that's been around not quite 4 years. And for those of you who missed the sign-in sheet, if you'd stop by on your way out, just give us your email address and your name. We can put you on our list and you would get announcements for meetings like this from now on. I have a couple of clipboards that I'm going to start around if there's any interest. One of them is for an event coming up this next week. We're co-sponsoring with Sierra Club and League of Conservation Voters, Annapolis Green, Citizen Climate Lobby, and one more, Severn River Association. We're co-sponsoring an evening with all of the candidates for elective office in the city of Annapolis. So we'll have about an hour with the mayor, mayoral candidates, questions and answers. And then we'll have half an hour roundtable discussions with the ward candidates.
You want to have a half an hour for question and answers. It's 2 hours.
It's a 2-hour event. Starts at, that's right. We have a little more time with mayoral candidates. So it starts at 7. It's at the Congregation Knesset Israel Synagogue on Spa and Hilltop Road. So you're all welcome. And I'm going to start a sign-in sheet if you would like to help. So we have just 6 open positions here. We need 1 more parking lot attendant. And then for the facilitators, or for the roundtables, we need 5 more facilitators. So again, if you're interested, either in the program or in addition in helping out, that'd be great. So start that around. The other clipboard has to do with another upcoming event. The Climate Stewards are doing a pilot of a pilot program of, for a group called World Climate Interactive Simulation. So this will be a role-playing kind of simulation where participants will be asked to represent different countries. And sort of like Model Congress or Model UN, for those of you who remember that. We need at least 10 people. We're having a facilitator come in from Chesapeake College who's done this before. We want to test the idea, is this something we want to do in a big public format? So this is the sign-in sheet for that. That event is on November 16th. It's a Thursday, and it'll be from 7 until 10 p.m. And all of that's explained on the clipboard.
If you sign in, do you have to participate in that, or can you observe it?
You can just observe it. Yep, you're welcome to come. Okay.
But signing means that you're participating in
The
the,
sign-in is for taking on a job.
yeah, just.
Yeah.
You may want to mention also they're having a town hall at Key School on Saturday.
Right.
I'm trying to coordinate a lot of the new citizen activist groups with the environmental community.
Right.
And they're going to have various panels and speakers.
Right. Some very
Attorney General.
prominent speakers, and I have that. I was going to do an announcement at the end as people get ready to leave, but since I have your attention, as Earl says, on this coming Saturday, there's an event called Environment Action Response Town Hall, which, if you take the acronym, is EARTH. And it's co-sponsored by a consortium of Annapolis area environmental groups. It starts at 2, it goes until 5. It's at the Key School Activity Building, Key School on Hillsmere Drive. And featured speakers and panelists include Senator Ben Cardin, Ben Grumbles, who's the Maryland Secretary of the Environment, Brian Frosch, who's the Attorney General for Maryland, and others. So that's Saturday. And I think I'll wait to mention the other upcoming events at the end. Okay, now for tonight's program. About a year ago or so, I was at an event here in the Friends Meeting House, sitting out in the lobby, and a woman came in and she said, "Is that your solar panel array up there?" And I proudly said, "Yes, it is." And she said, "It's so ugly." So there's no accounting for taste. But it relates to our discussion this evening. The Sierra Club Maryland chapters received a small grant to explore the questions and concerns about where to locate solar project. And this is an attempt to identify evidence and experience that address people's concerns, like the woman who came into the meeting house, and to help local jurisdictions develop what the sponsors say are environment, agriculture, economy, and community-friendly approaches to solar development. And tonight in this session, we have 2 speakers. We welcome them, Al Bartlett and Lynn Davidson. And they have a PowerPoint slideshow for us, and then we'll have discussion with them afterwards. So Al and Lynn, who's going to start?
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Al Bartlett, and she's Lynn Davidson, in case there was any confusion about that. So we're both from the Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club. How many of you all are Sierra Club members? And how many of you are CSGA members? That's Climate Stewards of Greater Annapolis, okay. And how many of those are members of both? Okay, great. So I think we have a small enough group and enough time that we can make this interactive as we go along. But we got started on this, as Phil said, just earlier this year. It became fairly obvious that as solar development was beginning to speed up in Maryland, that we were hearing a lot of those issues, like the one you mentioned. And what started to happen was, and it wasn't just this year, it was a bit earlier actually, that counties were getting feedback and were putting in place different sorts of policies about how solar could be developed in Maryland. And it started to become that there were moratoria happening. People were saying, not here, we like solar, but it's somewhere else. And so we had the sense that this was becoming something of a crisis, actually, because if, as we do, you believe that 100% clean energy, non-fossil fuel energy is an important part of where we all need to go to deal with the climate change issues that the climate stewards are talking about, we need to have solar as part of that equation. I think most people agree with that. And at the same time, where it goes and how it happens have become issues for a lot of people. So just a little bit about us, and then I think we have time to just quickly go around and say, I'd love to hear who you are, and also what you're thinking about. So what issue about it made you come out tonight instead of staying home and watching the depressing news? Right. So maybe we do a quick round of introductions. So I'm Al. I'm a retired pediatrician, actually, and I've been with Sierra Club actively. I've been with them for a long time, but since about 3 years ago, I started to get active shortly after I retired. And at that point, we were trying to fight the the new administration of the state about the coal-fired plants, and it was sort of, let's get rid of the coal, let's get rid of the coal. We still need to get rid of the coal. But I thought, well, then what's on the other side of beyond coal? Then it's actually clean renewable energy. And I decided that was a more positive way to focus than to say no, let's say yes to something. And so I've been working mostly on offshore wind and on solar development. And this last 6 months, it's been mostly solar. And Lynn?
I'm Lynn Davidson. I've sort of been a lifelong environmental activist. That's the way I've spent most of my adult life, working with various environmental organizations, mostly out of DC, and some international ones as well. So right now I am the co-chair of the Energy Committee at the Sierra Club for the state. And I've been here before. It's nice to see some familiar faces. So really would like to go around the room. I think we want to know our audience. We'd really like to know what brings you here tonight. So.
Yeah, so could we do that just quickly? Sure. Let's start with you. So in terms of solar, and you're thinking about solar and any issues that kind of are on your screen?
So again, I'm Phil Barrow. I'm a retired natural resource economist from University of Maryland, and very active in the Climate Stewards, hoping that we can reduce emissions and sequester enough carbon to avoid a climate crisis.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Jeff Lewis. I'm actually just a recent transplant to Herring Bay down here in Maryland. I've not lived in Maryland until February, but very quickly getting involved in environmental issues with my neighbors here. And I'm actually an energy economist by trade, so I've dealt with these things a lot at the national level. It's good to finally see at the local level, and I'm happy to get involved.
Great.
Yes.
My name is Bridget Sharp, and we as a group have been kind of looking at the solar issue and trying to figure out what is the best way to do it in Anne Arundel County. How can we be a part of, making sure that it's done in an environmentally friendly way. So we've all showed up to come here with Jeff to say about it.
Does the rest of your group want to just add anything to that, or I say your names?
How many people
anyway.
are in the group?
Well,
Oh, really? All of them? Wow, okay.
Okay.
So just you say who you are, and if you have something to add to that.
I'm an engineer. I just support the idea of using clean energy, and I want to know more about it.
I'm Paul Christensen. I'm a retired tech entrepreneur. I'm involved in a couple or three different environmental groups that are interested in understanding solar. I'm particularly interested in understanding the community and local reaction to solar installations.
Carl, do you want to?
I'm Carl Benson, and I'm heavily involved in the Climate Stewards of Greater Annapolis, and certainly want to hear. I mean, we've had various talks about solar, and this does come up on, when you hear about whether we, should be better using our land for solar farms and that kind of thing, and I'd really like to learn more about that.
Let's do the rest of this group.
Sure, I'm Eric. I grew up here. I'm sort of the opposite of Jeff. I actually live, I'm a Yosemite Park ranger, and I'm coming back here. I can tell you that the issue, I know a lot of folks who are employed under the Endangered Species Act, and a key part of solar in the West, desert tortoise are affected, habitat comes to mind, and so one of my key thoughts into the solar project is what kind of habitats are we affecting, and how to just do solar the best that we can.
That's interesting. I know that particularly out west, the habitat issue is probably more dominant than, because they've got more wild land in a sense, I guess.
And so even looking at our issues, we have watershed. I mean, we have issues with how water drains, and so it's, for me, I'm interested in what kind of land we choose to use for.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
I'm Kathy.
That's really why.
That's why. So I think what we're seeing in Anne Arundel, maybe you'll get into this, is there's a bit of a flood of small projects that have been authorized under the state program for community pilot programs. So in southern Anne Arundel, there are 5 projects that are pretty much being fast-tracked under that state program. So you're looking at a lot of acreage, that affects people, that affects the environment. And one reason I'm interested in trying to think through a strategy for the county is I think there is legitimate concern and almost backlash. We have this many projects affecting this many people, and they potentially, because of state preemption, have no say. And the county standards were never written with solar in mind, but we were kind of unprepared. And so I think from a policy standpoint, we have a lot of challenges. And I believe in renewable energy and solar energy, but I'm concerned that if this isn't solved well and solved fast, the brakes are going to go on.
I think that issue you're bringing up of having a voice and understanding what the rules of the process are and making sure that they're appropriate, and we didn't know, and so that we hear that other places as well, so it's not uncommon. And you
Right, I'm sorry. Yes, it's to develop it, to get in early in the logistics of developing this process.
Okay, right there.
My name is Brad Harris. I follow in your category. We've been surprised by vast development in our area, and it is very upsetting to our community because we don't feel that we're being represented in the developing company that is doing the developing is from Colorado. They're not from here, and we don't have much. We don't see any rights for our community at the moment.
I think you and I exchanged emails?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks, Don Kemple. I've been coming to the climate storage plant for a couple of years now, and I just came here to learn more about this. On the way over here, I was coming on 404 from Denton, and I saw a big field of solar panels I hadn't seen before. I don't know what that was. I'd say it was about a half a mile long.
Hi, I'm Sean Seaman. I work for Maryland Department of Natural Resources in their power plant research program. So we intervene on behalf of the state and the Public Service Commission on utility scale energy projects. So some of these projects we talked about are my projects. I'm not necessarily the bad guy, but that's what I do for a living. So I'm here obviously to hear what the community has to say about solar development because I'm very actively involved in them.
Let's get going on the back, and we'll work our way back to the front.
Big time Annapolis resident, work full time. Just curious about this project. I belong to Sierra Club. I got the invite, so I thought I'd come and see if there's something I can get involved in, or if it's find out more about it.
Great. We'd love to have you all involved.
My name is Kristen Minogue. I'm a science writer, and I'm still kind of new to kind of movement, trying to figure out how to get more involved. But I've heard about these bills in Maryland for 50% clean energy and 100% clean energy. And last time I heard, right now we're at 7%. So I'd kind of like to know if these bills pass, and I want to get behind these bills. If they pass, how do we actually get to 50%, 100%? And this seems like a good place to learn.
Okay. You should ask all these mayoral candidates and things about that too, because we don't actually have a plan right now. Ma'am?
I'm Sylvia Oliva. I'm a climate steward of Greater Annapolis, and I've been trying to get my condominium association to put solar panels on our roof. Not successful yet.
Okay.
Wes Jordan, I've been the climate steward since inception. I've been studying solar energy alternatives since I was an undergraduate in the 70s at the University of Colorado. I personally committed about 7 years ago at my residence and have gone entirely alternative with solar hot water. So I have 7 years of experience with that, and looking forward to influencing more as we continue with our climate stewards efforts.
Great.
I'm Sue Nolan, and I've come on to the climate stewards, and I'm really just here to learn. Didn't have anything in particular.
Okay.
Peter McGraw, I'm an engineer, and just as I saw the battles over the wind power, offshore wind power, and the pushback from everybody of not wanting to see it, I want to make sure we go forward in a smart way. And I'm all for solar. I just want to make sure we go forward in a smart and timely manner.
Okay, that's what we're hoping to.
Interested in learning more about solar energy. The last time I checked on it, it was an efficiency of about 14% commercial and much higher for NASA for some of the panels that they employ. So I was hoping you could give us some more data about efficiency, because I relate efficiency to size of panels and size of panels to visual noise, if you will. Also, I represent a garden club, and I'm their legislative contact, so if they're all upset about billboards, I can only imagine the feeling about solar panels and large arrays on the side of the road. So that's why I'm here.
Okay.
I'm a retired mechanical engineer. I've always been interested in solar at some level. My wife and I started coming to these meetings just because we got very interested in some of the topics. And so it's helped us educate us both about climate change, and it's not, who would have guessed it was this complicated?
Yeah, exactly.
My name is Bruce Wilson. I'm with a company called SGC Power, and I'm not a bad guy either, but I'm a solar developer. So I'm the guy that's looking for the land to put solar on. Like I said, I'm not a bad guy.
That's why he's sitting near the door.
But I'm not looking for, I'm not sure the project you're talking about in southern Anne Arundel. But I've seen some projects that take hundreds of acres. And we limit ourselves to the confines of the project community solar. And with that, it's less than 2 megawatts. So it limits it to about 9.5 to about 12 acres, depending on the lay of the land.
I'm Mike Lofton, I'm on the board of Growth Action Network, which is a coalition of individuals and associations interested in land use policy, primarily in the county.
I'm Carmen Skorlipka. I'm with the Sierra Club. And separately, looking at, I'm going to jump over to the Herring Bay advocates here. We're looking at putting in a transportation facility, small, very small, but utilizing the state of Maryland electric vehicle grant. And with that comes a solar powered garage for the plugins. So it's not really a garage, it's more of an awning-based system. So we're looking to install one someplace favorably in South County, down near Deal.
Okay.
Kim Ricketts, been with the Climate Steward since inception. I'm also a watershed steward. I actually promote wind and solar through Viridian Energy, particularly maybe wind. Although I'm very interested in solar on existing structures, a community solar bill that was passed last year in shopping centers and industrial areas where it's already existing, where you're not going to take, land that can be maybe used for forestation or something else. I particularly would like to see all these rooftops that exist to be converted to some sort of solar utilization.
I'm Earl Bradley. I'm chair of the Anne Arundel Group, the Sierra Club. And we're quite interested in making sure that the county meets a commitment for producing solar energy, but does it in environmentally sensitive and community neighborhood situation. And hopefully we can get down to what are people's real concerns are, rather than just having something new in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
That's why I thought that this was a pretty appropriate topic.
Great. Ma'am, you came in. We're just saying who we are and what issues about solar might be on our screen.
Carol Brantley, I'm a climate steward, and I'm also on the board of CSGA. And we had a speaker here a month or so ago. I can't really remember context, but they were talking about up at Rutgers, how in New Jersey, how they had these converted parking tarmacs with solar over them and people parked underneath them and other things. And that intrigued me in terms of how to use space that's available for larger kinds of things. And so I'm from Jersey. When I go up there next month, I want to go see.
You can go to community college and see.
Really?
College.
Oh, it influenced me. I was like,
Or even
why
the
can't
University
we-
of Maryland.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can do more things like that. Anyway, that's why I'm here to see what's happening.
Okay, so now, I don't know about Lynn, I'm totally intimidated. You all should probably be giving this talk because, so I am a retired pediatrician. I've been working on this. The one thing I have substantial in my background is I have spent the last more than 2 years as a member of what's called the Net Metering Working Group, which was the group that the Public Service Commission established to essentially develop the regulations and then the implementation arrangement and then the utility tariffs and all the other things associated with the community solar program. Because the legislature passed that law in 2015, and it's taken this long to actually have it to a point where projects are able to sign up to build and are actually starting to be built. So in the meantime, there have been these very intense conversations that involve the utilities, the Department of Environment, the People's Council, other government agencies, solar developers, and a few nonprofits that were kind of trying to watch out for how it affected people, and particularly the low-income part of the law, which I'll talk about a little bit more. So we'll launch into this with the understanding that, I think some of you probably have more technical background than we do. We have been doing research on, the first question we asked is, what are the concerns that people have? And we hear in other places as well, many of the concerns that those of you who have expressed concerns are talking about. And then what would be a balanced response to them? I mean, all of them are legitimate. No one is intending to roll over agriculture or local beauty or take away the sense of living that we have just to push a lot of solar out there. But we, on the other hand, believe that solar is part of our future and that we need to get there in a responsible way that listens to all those concerns and comes up with balance. And so that's what we're trying to do. I don't think we're going to pretend that we are going to tell you the answers. I think we're going to tell you what we've learned and where we come out, and some thoughts about how local jurisdictions, which are given responsibility for land use decisions under Maryland law, can think about these things with a lot of input at the local level. So we're not going to come out with a formula at the end. But I think it's always important, and Lynn has, whenever I forget this, reminded me that there's a bigger issue about why we need solar development rather than we'd like to build more solar. And so Lynn, you want to talk about that? I mean, this is what's happening. I'll turn this around so you can see.
Yeah, these slides are basically, this is Annapolis underwater.
I'm sure they recognize that.
Yeah. And some of the others are the Hurricane Maria and the fires out west. And I think it's always important as we go into this discussion to remember why we're pushing for solar, why we feel the need for it. Because, and that this is a very difficult and sort of new time for us as environmentalists. You know, it was one time that we could just save the environment, and now we're at a point where, you know, we're using technology to help do that. And So we're advocating for two different sides, of an issue, both, pro-solar and let's save the environment at the same time. And make sure that we're doing both things well. So I think that's really important, and it's always important that we remember why we're doing it. So climate action, and because I think that sometimes gets lost in the details.
Yeah, it's interesting, we were speaking with Phil at the beginning before we all started here, and he was saying that climate stewards are largely focused on mitigation. And that, for us, is the context for our interest in solar. It's an environmental action, and it's an environmental issue, in a sense. So we always want to keep that up front.
And like Al said, we've been on a fact-finding mission. He's been doing a lot more of the finding of facts than I have, so he'll be doing most of the talking this evening. But this forum is part of that. So every time we go away from one of these, he comes back with more slides. And we have more information than we can possibly cover tonight, but these were the ones we picked out that we thought were the most important to start with.
So there are almost certainly people in this audience that know of the energy that is generated in Maryland. What are the main sources, the major sources? Coal and, I heard gas.
Fracking, gas.
Nuclear. Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
So it's like, nuclear is just over 40%. This is, and it all comes from Calvert Cliffs. And then coal, we have 7 coal plants in Maryland, more than any other state on the East Coast. As a result, we have some of the dirtier air on the East Coast. And as a pediatrician, the asthma and the other things that are associated with that are also part of my concern and part of the issue why we want to get off of coal and fossil fuel in general, not just for carbon, but for other reasons as well. And this little circle at the bottom basically take that, the gray is all the other stuff, including the coal and the nuclear, the gas, and the other things. We presently have in our energy profile a carve-out for solar generated in the state of 2.5%, and that's to be reached by 2020. And since we're not there yet, it's not 2.5% yet. This is building towards your 7% issue. So we have 2.5% carve-out for solar. There's a fair amount of wind that we pull in, mostly from other states. And then there's a 2.5% carve-out for the offshore wind, which is now stalled because Congressman Harris threw a spanner wrench into the process, and hopefully we will work that out. So basically, if we wanted to get to 100% clean energy, of the energy generated in Maryland, if let's say it's 50-50 wind and solar, which people like Jacobson said that's feasible. To get from 2.5% to 50% is a massive increase, and in fact, that gets us to our first conclusion, which is that if we want to meet our own greenhouse gas reduction goals and have 100% clean renewable energy here in Maryland, we need at least a 20-fold expansion of solar. So that's from here to here, okay? So that's the question that's driving this, how do we get there? Your question.
Yes?
I have a question. When you're saying trying to reach 100%, are you saying this is energy generated in the state? It's not about consumption. This is about what is produced in Maryland, not what we use as Maryland consumers.
Right, so, and that's an important distinction, but at the same time, like a lot of our collaboration has been with the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research, if you know them, and based in Tacoma Park, it's like the Maryland Energy Policy think tank. They do a lot of the analyses that people who are writing bills and stuff go to, and so on. The core issue becomes, not all of it has to be in Maryland, but for example, that port development that we're talking about with offshore wind, in order for that to happen, it can't be just those 2 relatively small projects that we're talking about. There has to be a pipeline of actual development that is connected to Maryland for us to even think about having that hub with those industries and those jobs here in Maryland. Similarly for solar, the jobs, solar is more likely to be local and more likely to be distributed and more likely to be part of that distributed grid that we want to build. We can pull in a lot of wind from Indiana but that still is the old utility-based model of pumping out large amounts of energy through the existing grid, rather than having that distributed grid we want. So with IER, the calculation is that we would like most of it to be in Maryland, although we can import clean energy from elsewhere. So that's sort of what the proportions are. That's up for grabs, I think, but the idea is this is basically an economic issue as much as a energy development issue.
And an energy security issue. You know, as we deal with more of these issues of climate change, our energy security does become an issue. And if we have more of it at home, and we're not this huge net importer of our energy, we're more likely to have be able to go turn those lights on after a storm. So.
Okay. So there are a couple of things that suggest to us that this is at least feasible, this kind of rapid and substantial expansion of solar. And one of them is something you all certainly know this, that the price of solar, which is the orange line here, the cost has come down. This is a five-fold reduction from $7.50 in 2009 to about $1.50 per watt, and actually it's even lower than that in some cases. And along with that, there has been this year-by-year growth of solar installation. And so that trend is likely to continue. And as the technologies get better, as the efficiency gets better, this makes it more and more possible. Actually, if you go back to the mid-1970s, there has been a 200-fold decline in the cost of a solar panel. So this has been an amazing, I'm not sure that this has happened in, I don't know that many different technologies, but this is amazing. And as a result, this is the jobs issue and the economic issue. There have been a substantial amount of jobs developed. The Energy Information Agency of DOE is a little stricter. Some people say we have 3 times as many solar jobs as coal. Actually, they use a tighter definition, and they come up with about 2.5 times as many solar jobs as coal. And the solar jobs are growing. And so this is for the state's economy, that becomes an important point. And this slide just simply shows that it pertains to Maryland. Makes a couple of points. One, that year over year through 2016, and the rest are estimates, that increase in solar capacity this is annual capacity, that's not the sum, that's how much is added. The other point it makes is that the bottom is the residential, and that is expected to continue, but a lot of the addition is going to be these larger projects, the utility and commercial scale solar projects, and that becomes a factor in the things that we're talking about here. CSP, actually, there's yellow and there's yellow. CSP is that concentrated solar power where you take mirrors and you beam the solar up at a cauldron or a tube or something with water in it that turns to steam and drives turbines. In the north, that isn't very effective, and we won't expect that here. So the yellow here is residential, which will continue. But we've got this growth of bigger projects, and we now have over 5,000 solar jobs in Maryland, and last year was almost double the year before. So we're on a roll, sort of.
Why are you showing a diminishing of residential solar?
I'm sorry, what?
A diminishment.
I'm not showing that. That's SEIA. That's just their projections. I don't know whether they think that the uptake will drop off, or you get out to a certain point in 2019, the investment tax credit starts to drop. I don't know.
That implies that there'd be a diminishing of production as opposed to a steady state, or leveling off.
This is capacity installed.
This is what I mean. Right, but this is year. This is
efficiency. This is new.
This is
I'm
new.
not talking about efficiency.
Okay. Well, what I'm saying is this slide is talking about new installation.
Right. So every year is separate from the year before. It means that it's not that 2019 is 2018 plus a little bit. It's a 2019 is a bigger year than 2018.
The point is, it's not cumulative.
Okay, I can't answer your question on why SEIA.
No, that's the answer. It's not cumulative.
It's new installed.
Is that what?
Yeah, it's, each year is a separate thing.
Yeah.
But it didn't say that, so.
Oh, that's what I said, it's annual capacity installed, but, yeah. So anyway, these trends are one of the things that make us think that solar expansion is possible. And the other thing that's out there are the incentives for solar, and this is the investment tax credit that ended, I believe it's the end of 2015 for a few months until the Congress made the deal about the sequester, and the Republicans got more money for the Pentagon, and the Democrats got more money for a couple of things, one of which was restoring the tax credits for clean energy. And so right now through 2019, if you install any of those technologies, but solar photovoltaic, PV, you get 30% of your, you get a 30% credit, dollar for dollar credit on your taxes, if you owe that much taxes, which is a trick. And so certain investors become more prominent in solar because they have what's called a tax appetite for it. Then it drops off so that by 2022, it's down to 10%. It's supposed to stay that way. Honestly, if it were me, if I had a chance to build solar right now, which I'm waiting for the community solar projects to do, because I can't build it on my house, I would do it now, because under the guise of what is being called tax reform, we don't know what's going to happen to a lot of these things. This was supposed to be a solid deal, but you know, we're renegotiating everything, right? So, but right now, that 30% is there for those who build solar. There are also, I just made this list of Maryland State and Anne Arundel specific incentives. There are a number of them. There's a production tax credit at the state level. There are property tax incentives. There are sales tax exemptions. The PACE program basically lends capital. It will make, this is for commercial properties only right now, and not in every county, but Anne Arundel is one, where you can borrow the money to build your solar array and pay it back through your tax assessment. It's added onto your taxes, so it goes for 20 years. I think the interest rate now is 6.25%, so it's, for this sort of thing, reasonable. There's a link down here if you want to know more about incentives and things like that that pertain. You can go to the Desire website. All you have to do is remember Desire and take out the E, and Google it, and you'll come up with a state-by-state listing of incentives and related policies. So, and then, who knows about RECs? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay, 7, 8, all right, it's pretty good. Renewable energy credits, who has solar on their roof? Okay, you still get a check every month?
It's diminished to pretty low.
We'll get to that, yes, exactly. Okay, so I'm gonna go through this real quick because it's a little complicated, and Lynn says you shouldn't do this, but it actually is, it's a really important part of the economy of the thing. So utilities don't make electricity, they buy and distribute electricity under the way the system works now. And if you're in one of the states, as we are in Maryland, or DC, we have renewable portfolio standards that say so much of the energy that the utility handles has to be, quote, renewable. Now, renewable in Maryland doesn't always mean wind and solar, unfortunately, but it has come from a renewable source. How do you get those? The people that are actually making the renewable energy, like people who have solar on their roof or bigger solar, or wind or some other things, like waste incineration building, which is not one of our favorites, you get a renewable energy credit. You get a credit for every megawatt that you put onto the grid. And so the utilities have to buy these credits, which is usually separate from the electricity itself. So the electricity can go over here, but they buy a credit to say, okay, that counts as part of my 25% requirement, or 20%. If you have a specific carve-out for one kind, like solar or offshore wind, so those SRECs and ORECs, because there are fewer of them, they tend to be a lot more valuable. And so people who have solar arrays on their roof get checks every month. They generate these RECs and they get money back for it. That makes them happy, and then speeds up the payoff for the investment they made in the rig. In many cases, this is what makes solar investment economically possible, particularly for offshore wind. They can actually borrow money against the promise of the renewable energy credits that they're going to get. The utilities have to buy the electricity wherever they buy it. They also have to buy the RECs. So the price of electricity does go up because of RECs. And that's something that people pay a lot of attention to. But in the long run, because the lower cost of renewables as they expand can offset the cost of the RECs. That's the thinking in the end. But anyway, these renewable energy credits, it's that payoff that people get month after month after month that helps make the economics of solar investment work. And then, you want to talk about community solar?
No, that's yours.
She just knows that I did those 2 years worth of 2-hour phone calls. All right, so then some other thing, besides these incentives, some other things are happening. We're having these new kinds of projects. Up until recently, the solar that was built in Maryland was there for the people that built it. It was on their roof, serving their building or their home. It was in their parking lot next door, serving their facility. That's called accessory use. That's where most of the solar in Maryland has been until recently. Now we've got one thing is community solar, which is meant to serve many people from one array. Those happy people out there either have bought shares of the power coming from that array, or in some cases they may actually have bought 6 panels that are serving their home because they couldn't put it on their home. Community solar is designed to get solar to the folks who, like my neighborhood, we have some beautiful oak trees, but too much shade. The roof is structurally not appropriate for solar. You live in a condo or an apartment, you're a renter, you can't put it on your roof, you don't own the roof. There are a lot of reasons, but more than half of us in Maryland can't put solar on our roofs. This program is designed, right now it's a pilot, but it's designed to let people participate in solar even if they can't put it directly on their own property, right? And how does it work? Right now it's a pilot program. The legislature said, let's try this out and see if it does what it's supposed to do and it's feasible. So it's not very big, 200 megawatts, divided over 3 years, divided among the different utilities, Pepco, BGE, Delmarva, Potomac. We've been working for 2 years to get it going. Now it's starting to be built, and it's divided into 3 categories. One of which is actually intended to respond to the legislature's mandate that we find ways to include low-income households, because low-income folks are usually the last to be able to benefit from things like renewable energy. And so it's a good program. It's really just starting to become operational now, and we're going to evaluate it and learn from it, and that's our task for the next couple of years. The other thing that started to happen in Maryland over the last few years is that we're starting to see real big projects. This one is one of the biggest that exists right now, but others will be built. This is on public land outside, that's the penitentiary, just near Hagerstown, right? So this one has a fence around it. They all have fences around them, but this one is particularly needed a fence. But that is about 150 acres. And if you took 10 of those, you'd have 300 megawatts, which is about the size of a medium-sized coal plant. So that is the kind of thing, this is what's called utility scale solar. And utility scale solar becomes important because it's like anything. If you're hand building a car, it's very tedious and expensive. If you're mass producing cars, it's much cheaper per unit. And economies of scale happen with solar as well. So the 2 megawatt size that community solar represents is really not the most, if we want really good low cost solar energy for everybody, we're not going to be able to do it just with 2 megawatt pieces. The economies of scale for solar kind of peak out somewhere between 10 and 20 megawatts. If you go bigger than that, it's no more expensive for the next 10 megawatts than it was for the first 20, but it doesn't get cheaper. But up between 10 and 20, it gets cheaper as you build more. And so that's where we get the 6 cent or 5.5 cent or 5 cent or 4 cent per kilowatt power that solar can generate comes from some of these larger arrays. And that one looks humongous, but actually, just for scale, I took Google Earth up to about 12,000 feet and took a picture of it, so it's in here. If you look real close, you can actually see the panels right here around the prison. Oh, and the guy's getting away. But so this is in the area. It's about a few miles south of Hagerstown. It's not purely rural. It's semi-rural. It's not that far from the county seat. But you can see on the scale of the land around it, it's not gigantic.
It's a very impressive installation. To drive by it, it's pretty amazing. As I said earlier, I'm a solar guy. I've been doing it for 30, 40 years. And when I drove by that for the first time, it was oohs and ahs in my car. So, just to bring this up, that may be the largest constructed. I don't know, I have to go back and look. But probably more than half the projects we're working on right now are twice that size.
Yeah. That is not the maximal size, actually, for a utility scale solar, but they have reached their economies of scale. But that was how much public land was available around the prison. And public land is something that we all need to talk about because, Anne Arundel County may have, or the state may have within the county, some pieces of land that would be perfectly appropriate for solar development. So that's something to keep in mind.
Does anyone know how large the facility is here in Annapolis at the old mill? Because there's a huge array going in there too. That's 10 megawatts.
Arrow?
It's 10 megawatts? Yeah. Okay. So about a third. Well, I don't know because what they did is they chopped it up into 2 megawatts or less so they could void over a program. Because we only have jurisdiction for 2 megawatts or above the utility scale. So that's how we kind of worked around that. And I think it's 5 2 megawatt projects around there.
That's 10. Okay. All right. So
there are different interconnections. That's how we did that.
So can I go back to you for a second because this is the average value of solar and non-solar RECs in the last couple of years. You already answered that question. What happened?
Well, I can't tell you why. I should be looking into it more closely than I have, but for the longest time, I did my solar installation in 2010. And I was receiving approximately $150 per megawatt production, which was a nice check to be receiving.
Right.
Only I haven't received one lately, and I don't know what's going on. So
haven't received anything?
Well, no check for several months now, and I have to get back. See, you have to enter into an agreement, unless you do all that paperwork yourself, which I don't choose to do. I work through a clearinghouse, somebody who.
Yeah, that's the way they're marketed. I think what may have happened is that it's not worth it to them to cut a check for less than $25, and they're waiting until you get that high. What actually happened?
I typically produce about a megawatt per month.
Right,
so.
and here's what's happened to the price. It's gone like the price of solar, but the reason is, so actually in 2017, they said we're less than $10 per REC. It used to be, back in 2008, over 300. That's the bottom low. Those are the solar RECs. And then, you're right, when you came on, it was actually still pretty high. And then it plummeted. And it plummeted because that carve-out is so small. And because of these bigger projects and other things, we've started to fill up the space. So they weren't so rare anymore. They were actually more than were needed for our year's quota of solar RECs. And so the price went boom.
So maybe I don't have to make a phone call because you just explained it.
You might want to save the money. Yeah. So, but this has been important because the point here is that we're talking about incentives. We're talking about the fact that big projects are buildable and they're the kind of things in many ways that we need to get the low cost renewable energy that we need, and at the same time, it's not as simple. Nothing is ever as simple as it should be, right? And so this is one of the reasons why it's not simple. One of the major economic incentives has had the bottom sort of drop out of it. And then we get to the questions that we're hearing here. Why would you want to build solar on the ground, right? Why don't we build it all on, Lynn, you want to do this?
Sure.
She's
excited.
She said
Throw me a bone. Okay, yeah, we're gonna talk about things like why not put it under power line rights of way, or roofs and parking lots, and brownfields and landfills. And these are very good questions, and we've been looking into them. The first one about power line rights of way is interesting, and apparently people have been thinking about this for a long time and talking about it for a long time. And some of the issues that are being faced are the fact that these areas under the power lines, the utility companies need to be able to get to. They need to be able to get their trucks in there and move around and be able to climb these towers and do their work. And so it can't be just filled up with solar panels, you know. Another problem that we're hearing about is that these pieces of property are not owned by the utility company. It's not like we can go in and say, hey, you know, BG&E or Pepco, you know, let's just put these solar panels under your wires, because they're often owned by landowners that and the utilities have some right of way, but they don't have the right to go in and do something along this line. And we still think it definitely needs to be explored more, but we haven't been able to find a place that has actually done this yet. So we've heard some rumors that New Jersey is either thinking about doing it, but we haven't found those anywhere yet. So we're wondering why they aren't there. And have
I've seen in Massachusetts, they're doing it a lot on the highway rights of way.
Highway rights of way.
Mhm.
We'll have to look into that, see, because that's a possibility. So that still needs to do, you know, figure out why it's not happening. And we have run into some trouble with the utility companies just not wanting to give us any information. You know, they're just pretty tight about their information. They say it's security issues. So trying to get through, you know, that sort of phase is a bit difficult. With regard to the rooftops, these large big box stores look like they should hold plenty of solar panels. And many of them are, in fact, putting solar panels on. There are a couple of issues there. One is, once again, ownership, because often the people that live inside not live inside, but work inside, you know, use those as businesses. They're not the owners of the property itself. And so there's negotiation on two fronts, both with the people that are occupying the space as well as with the owners. There's also the issue of the fact that I think it speaks to efficiency, and what you were talking about earlier is that we put all these panels on the roof, but the use is right there. The use is inside that building. So it's not going out to the community. It's a good thing, should have more of it. Another issue there has to do with as it does with residential, with the age of the roof. So these solar panels, for the most part, have 20, 30-year lifetimes, so do roofs. But if the roof has been up for 10 years, they don't want to put that many solar panels on and then have to take them off in 10 years and then put them back on again. So there are these issues that are coming up that are not making it easy to put it on a lot of roofs very quickly.
Can I just add something to that?
Yeah.
So the National Renewable Energy Lab did a number of different techniques to try to make estimates. They actually have a site where there are state-by-state estimates of how much of the existing power demand could be met by rooftops. And they did LiDAR flyovers and all sorts of crazy things. And so the national average is 39% of existing consumption could be met by rooftops as seen from above, essentially. And interestingly, Maryland comes out right there. But then what NREL says is that when you go up on those roofs, many of them are not going to be able to actually put solar there for various reasons. And so they estimate that it's half, or maybe they estimate actually less than half of the potential capacity could be met by the actual roofs that are out there. And that includes house roofs and commercial and industrial roofs. And when you fly at a BWI, it looks like everybody, and like all the solar you ever need could be put on those roofs. But actually from NREL estimates, it would probably be for our state about 20% of the need that could actually be met from rooftops. That's present, that's before we electrify the transportation sector, in which case it's going to go up some.
I'm not sure I understood, what was the problem with parking lots?
We didn't talk about that, but yeah, you want us to talk about that, or?
It's cost mostly. It costs more, and then there are also insurance issues and things like that, because you're putting it in a place that people are parking under and walking under, and it's a lot of solar has to do with economy of scale.
You may have a comment on this. I mean, I've talked to some solar developers about this with that same question. What about that? Because parking lots look good. But the people who own the shopping mall or whatever it is would have to essentially make the investment, right? But it turns out that the answer I got was that if you're going to have, it's different from building on a roof. If you're going to have people walking underneath it, the building standards change a lot, and you have to have higher quality steel. The components generally are more expensive, so that universities and some public buildings and things can have them. It's an investment that many businesses don't see as being as good a payoff as putting it on their own roof for their own use. And as Lynn said, most rooftop solar it's just like in your house. I mean, some days it'll meet all your needs, some days you'll have a little extra and you pump it out onto the grid and get credit for it. Many days you'll still be pulling from the grid. And so it doesn't take care of the rest of everybody else's needs. But it does take that demand off the system. So it's important in its own right, and we definitely should max it out. And we would like to do that, but it's just not going to meet all of our needs.
Bruce, did you have anything to add to that?
There was a dedication last week at University of Maryland on 3 parking garages, total just over 2 megawatts for the 3 parking garages. If you're ever on campus, go take a look. They're actually really attractive designs, the way they put it together. They are visible.
So these aren't tall?
Well, no, they're not. Well, it's inside, I'm going to say top beam. You can take a truck in there to the top beam of the solar, and then the solar's on top of that. So
it's just one level?
It's the top level, yeah.
So it's essentially it's like rooftop.
The solar's on top of that.
Oh.
It's not like the things where in Arizona you go out and you get shade and solar from the same thing. This is essentially rooftop of the garage.
It is shade and solar. So cars can park under there, be protected. There are gaps. So if you're there tailgating, you're still going to get wet if it rains. But it's the nature of the design. It's designed for snow load for the region. It's structurally very, very sound.
Okay, but the picture is just the top level of the
Top level,
garage,
yes.
and that's covered with solar.
Yes.
Now, the one at Anne Arundel Community College is ground-based.
Just a
parking lot. Yeah, so it's not an elevated garage.
Right.
So,
It'd be
garage level parking, how they did the financing for that.
That's the kind I've seen out west, where you need the sunshade and things.
And actually, I used to live in Phoenix, Arizona, and those shade roofs, or whatever you want to call them, have been there for decades. I lived there back in the 90s. They didn't have solar back then, but now they are. So that was the technology they were using to shade cars because of all the heat, not intending to put solar panels on the back.
Right. Yeah, that's part of the environment.
People often say to me, well, which should I choose, wind or solar? And I keep trying to explain to people they're not mutually exclusive. We cannot get all of our needs met, as you were just saying, with solar. So I keep telling people, well, you know, when it's dark out, you should be on wind as well. It takes 5 minutes online, and you hook up to wind power, and you don't even know when it switches over. So I wish, personally, that this knowledge would be expanded. You do both, because solar is not going to.
Yeah, we would like the wind to be wind from outside the state is actually a bit pricey, so low income households.
Well, I'm on 100% wind, and it's the same. It's slightly a hair less. If you go 50% wind, you can do that. It's certainly less, and at 100% wind, it's right there the same as BG&E's price. So. So it really is, you know, and even if it were a hair more, I would still, because I can't have solar on my roof, so.
Yeah, pay a premium. Yeah, go ahead.
Just want to put a little caution to this concept of trying to find the cheapest way to do this. I mean, I keep hearing that things are prohibitive because they're too expensive, and you know, there is potentially a willingness to pay for some of these things, right? So I'm not necessarily gonna, if I'm signing up for solar for my house and I'm gonna do a community solar, I might question where is that being built, and I might be willing to pay for it more if it's in a parking lot. So, you know, ruling these things out, you know, the way you described it, there's actually a very large possibility for, you know, meeting scale in rooftops and commercial. I just want to make sure that that's not being missed, because it may be cheaper to do it at utility scale, but maybe that's not the way that all the citizens want to have it for them, right? So there should be an option. And so just, and believe me, I've worked in economics of energy for a long time, and getting costs down is the first thing to do, because that's the first thing people look at. But once you get to a certain point, it's also a question of, you know,
what makes sense. Yeah. No, and I'm sorry, we didn't mean to, I'm not meaning to convey that you only do the cheapest thing. So as I said, you know, we would definitely want to max out rooftop, which is definitely more expensive than building on ground, but it would take a substantial chunk of load off the system, because it would be coming right inside, and when you throw storage in, which is going to be the next thing, and then.
And you put it on the grid, right? I mean, that's what a lot of us do.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And like,
so,
they're not using that just for their parking garage, right? They're actually.
And just to be clear, rooftop is more expensive than ground building, and we do definitely recommend building on rooftops. So, yeah, it's just that the economics so often turn out to be the drivers of what happens and what doesn't happen on the bigger picture. So that's why we keep mentioning it, but it's not the only thing. So this is all going to turn out to be, in the end, a mix. So if we can meet 20% of our need from rooftop, and that's going mostly into the places that have the roofs, that's good, and that should happen. And then there's the rest of it, and then we have things like brownfields, which Lynn was going to talk about. Which the economics there is very interesting, because these are very positive things.
Yeah, the brownfields and landfills are the ones that look the most promising of all of these that we've looked at. They're capped, depending on what they are. They're either capped with cement or with layers of clay, and the solar arrays can sit on top, and there's not a whole lot that you want on top of a landfill or brownfields. So so this one's a very good one. It may take a little bit longer in the process to, you know, for a developer to put something there than it would for going, you know, just an extra layer of
review.
Review, yes, government review.
Yeah.
But it definitely looks promising, and they're, who's handling this?
Department of Environment. DOA has a section that, and actually they if you propose to build in a landfill or a brownfield, as long as it is appropriately retired, as they say, or archived, that means the cap is there, asphalt or cement on a brownfield, or clay and topsoil, or a membrane and topsoil on a landfill, as long as your plan does not penetrate that seal of the stuff underneath, you can build there. It's about 1 month or 6 week extra time in the review process, and that's all. And the way you do that is you build on concrete footings. So you just anchor your structures on big concrete block things, and so you do not have to penetrate the pile. So it's actually a relatively low-cost construction.
So this
Yeah.
would be something that, you could consider, in your county, in your community, trying to get maybe some incentives for. It's really a really good option. Sean, did you have anything that you would add to that?
We are very much trying to promote this within the state. I'm working with MEA, Maryland Energy Administration, as well as MDE on this, and I think all three agencies are aligned that this is where we'd like to see solar. Unfortunately, the reality is back when we deregulated in 1999, I believe it was, merchant generators, we can't site power plants anymore. So merchant generators come in with locations. We can't really tell them where to build. So all we can do is try to encourage them through incentives or otherwise to go on these sites. But I'm actually working on a project. We're working on a GIS package that has distributed generation in it. And I work with MDE right now to try to get these locations, meaning brownfields and landfills, on that as a layer on there to try to encourage developers to look at those sites.
On the MDE website, there is a listing, but it's not mapped. It would be great to have a map.
Yeah, on our website, which is Power Plant Research Program, you just Google that, Maryland Power Plant Research Program, you will see something called Smart DG Plus. If you click on that link, a GIS program will come up, and we will be adding this. I can't tell you when, it's going to be a while. We're very, very busy right now, but probably within the next 6 to 12 months, we should have those layers on there, hopefully.
So, was there something else you want to say about brownfields?
No, here's some questions.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
I don't know if I heard you correctly, but you said it would, for the landfill, brownfield thing, that it would take more time because of government regulation. I don't understand what that's about.
Oh, it's simply that these are places they would call brownfields, and they are landfills, because there's stuff buried there.
I understand
Right.
that.
So the idea is there's an agency that has responsibility for making sure that that stuff doesn't get out. And so if you were going to do something on top of one of these, even if you're going to build a park, which in some cases has been done, you have to go back to the agency to show them their plan, show them your plans, which is an extra step. It goes beyond the permitting process. To show them your plans to assure them that what you're going to do doesn't disturb the bad stuff that's underneath the cap.
I can actually speak to that. For utility scale about 2 megawatts, I don't mean to call you out, but that's not the case. It wouldn't take any longer. We have a 4 to 6 week review time built in. So what my program does is, even though we're out of the DNR, we represent all 7 executive state agencies. So what we do is we write what we call an environmental review document. We also write proposed conditions, the Public Service Commission will consider. All that is built into the CPCN, and that's the term that Public Service Commission uses to permit these facilities. So I don't think you're right about it taking longer.
That's what the MDE people told me,
Well,
the brownfields people, but
they always want more time.
Okay.
4 to 6 weeks, that's the
Okay.
reality of this. But
one of the great things about these things, though, is that because the brownfields particularly tend to be in areas where there's an interconnection point to the grid fairly close, because they tend to be in developed areas. They tend to be near businesses and residences that could use the power. They're not way out in the country someplace.
What do you mean by brownfield?
A brownfield is it could be anything from an old gas station to a plant. There's Alcoa, for example, up in Frederick. There was a plant where they were dealing with chemical compounds that were considered to be toxic. And so because that area has been exposed to those compounds, it's considered, you can't just, once that place is gone, you can't just do anything to it. There are regulations that say it has to be contained. It's not a Superfund site, it's not that bad, but it does need to be contained. And so there are regulations that say what you have to do to it, to essentially make it usable, but there are limitations on the use. Sir?
Do you know of any cases where local zoning has been used to drive these facilities toward these more desirable locations?
I do not, and that's one of the things that when we get to talking about what would a good zoning thing look like, to me, that would be one thing that you'd want to put up front, would be to to identify, like that Alcoa plant is up in Frederick, which in Frederick it was fairly freaked out about solar development. And so, but, you know, we talked to one of the council members up there, and they're gonna start looking at that Alcoa plant as a place where potentially building could happen. But right now, I'm not sure that anyone actually has taken that proactive step of thinking about incentives or other ways to drive the solar development there. And again, there aren't enough landfills and brownfields probably to make up the extra. If rooftop is 20%, the extra 80% is probably not going to be made up by landfills and brownfields, but it's a chunk, and it's there for the taking right now. And so I think we would agree that this is something that we should be trying to move people toward.
Al?
Yes, sir.
I think the other thing, the Public Service Commission, regarding community solar in particular, defines a brownfield as an ex-landfill. It doesn't have to be hazardous waste, but it can also be an ex-surface mine as well, mining gravel and sand out.
Okay. All right. Let's move on. But just actually, the sum of this discussion in our mind is we want rooftops, we want landfills, we want brownfields. We should max those things out. At the same time, to get the solar energy we need and to build arrays, not one array that serves the whole community, but to have to have us all have at least half of our energy coming from solar, which is where we need to go, we're still going to have to build some on the ground. And there's no way around that. So then the question becomes, what ground? And that's where we're going with this. Because, here, Lynn, you like this one. We heard Phil said, the first thing he said, what are some of the things that we hear about solar on the ground? And the first thing that we heard was they're ugly, right? So Lynn and I have different opinions. I mean, well, I think we agree, but I happen to think these things are ugly, right? Particularly the ones that try to look like trees.
I'd rather have the trees.
You know, but Lynn's vote is for
Oh, the power plants, I think they're really ugly.
coal-fired power plants. Yeah, they're not very attractive either.
But more than that, I mean, we really have, you know, as a society, have learned to live with an awful lot of things that are pretty ugly. Just the power lines, for heaven's sakes, why can't we bury them, you know? I mean, they're pretty ugly. They're running along every road and through farmland and everything else. So viewscapes, it's very much a personal opinion. You know, some people think they're beautiful, other people think they're ugly.
Well, they're uglier when they're in your backyard too.
Yeah. But one of the things that's interesting, and several of the things we're going to talk about here are susceptible to zoning. Most places require, where there is reasonable zoning about solar development, require visual screening with trees, with a natural boundary that is. And I think most of the developers are sensitive to this issue because they don't want people not wanting them to build another one because the first one was so ugly. So, but most of the places that have decent zoning approaches, and we haven't found anyone perfect yet, do mandate a visual screen around of living plants to screen off these, because these things aren't very big, they're not very high.
And this is where you have a real say as well, because this will be at the county level, where a lot of these decisions are.
As will.
I don't want to get too off track, but I think the frustration in Southern Anne Arundel is that the county enacted the zoning ordinance, said you have to comply with the landscape manual. The landscape manual was written 3 years before the zoning ordinance. It does not address all our other concerns. These projects are coming in under that law. And so the people, I'm not one of the people faced with these in my backyard, but people are. And the standards are not there, so we actually are in a position because of the sequencing where there is not an opportunity to influence it. And I think this rush to have these down I don't know who's subscribing to the community ones that we have in Arundel, because they're on people's property and we don't.
Yeah.
They're not kumbaya, I'm sharing in it
Yeah.
in many cases. So yes, you could influence it if it was in the future, but we're here today without.
And, yeah,
And I share my example so that I can get some feedback from someone in there. I don't want to hold this up, but before I lose my composure. I live next to Subly landfill. There are currently 2 cell towers. There are power lines. There is a dredge pond, and that was all put in next to historic homes and other homes where the community's concerned. And now we're being told a month after the proposal was turned in that they didn't have time to have a community meeting, and they're putting in a 60-acre, 6 megawatt, I believe is the size.
Yeah. I looked at your.
Speak up.
Right next to our homes. Yet we don't have any input because the county code isn't strong enough to protect us. I had people at the county tell me that they don't have any power, and hopefully Maryland can save it. So I'm not opposed to solar, but when you stack all these things together in our community and don't give the community any rights, that's where we really have trouble.
Right.
I was gonna bring this up, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the counties do not have the jurisdiction to cite these or permit these. And when I say these, I'm talking about utility scale. However, the flip side is they're absolutely wrong. They do have a say in the process. This is what I've been trying to tell the county. They need to intervene in the Public Service Commission case. That's where their voice is heard. And in fact, their voice is more powerful than any other person, any other entity in the process. Okay, so the counties are kind of hiding behind this a little bit. So the state does have preemption authority, but the counties need to intervene in these cases and to have their voices heard. Just like the state does and just like other interested parties do. So we're trying to get that word out. And there was a bill this last session that didn't go through, that Baker was trying to push through, to try to get counties a little more authority, but they do have a say in the process. And if they're telling you they don't, then you need to send them on the way.
Sean, does that apply to community scale?
No, most of those are under 2 megawatts.
Right.
I work strictly utility scale.
So that site does have a community, that's 2, and then it has a larger one. So you would be involved on that site
Yes.
for the.
Yeah, and I think we just heard about that the other day. I'm sorry, I was traveling earlier this week, I just got back. But I heard about is this in southern Anne Arundel County?
Yeah, and I have some of your fact sheets from Department of Natural Resources about some of the other locations. I have a bunch of them that say stuff like there are historic sites in view. If there is a shining issue from the sun, that they should look out for complaints from neighbors, but not likely to cause a property value issue. These don't make me feel any better either.
Speak up.
So, this is an important discussion. So I think that for the issue that you guys have, you're facing 2 issues. One is that you have what sound like inadequate regulations now. So that's your action push for, and as I said, we're going to try to, at the end, we're going to come around to some general recommendations about what we think are elements of a better policy that would deal with some of these issues, like the visual issue and so on. But you don't have it now, and that puts you in a difficult situation, but you can still raise the issue, and because the PSC does have final authority, if they hear enough from, and it should be through the council, the law that was passed in the last legislative session says that the Public Service Commission and those reviewing these projects, I guess all of you, have to take into account the county or the local jurisdiction's recommendation.
It actually says you have to consider, and that's a very, I'm not a lawyer.
Well, I said consider, okay, I said take into account, but yeah.
It's very.
It doesn't mean they have to go with it, so if they really don't believe, if they think, no, this is appropriate, It meets all of the criteria of the certificate of public convenience and necessity, which is what you were talking about, the ultimate decision by PSC, then they can override the county. But if the county has done a good review with good standards, it's unlikely that they will do that.
Your problem's with the county, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it sounds like the problem's with the county, that they're not listening enough.
He's got, Brad has two
Mhm.
facilities on one property. The other people in Anne Arundel only have these community scale facilities.
Yeah, there are no utility scale solar in the county. I don't know if they filed yet. We're talking to a developer who wants to build one in southern Anne County, and we just heard about it. I think it's this one. Turning Point. Yes, yeah, so you already know that. Is this one Turning Point? Yeah. Oh, okay.
Not to make this all about us, but it's my.
Well, I live in the county, so I'm.
Oh, why not?
Yeah.
So we get some clarity would be great. The state law that created the community pilot program has created a tariff structure for the developers to be able to finance these small projects. So then I guess, once the state, again, it's coming down from the state, but they created a framework that then BG&E in our case adopted. And so it seems like they're kind of on a roll because they have that tariff from the state.
Well,
And so at that point, the only performance standards of the county, I don't know where to stop it, nobody says go, no go.
Right, and you saw on an earlier slide where it said, we talked about community solar, and it had to be under 2 megawatts, and that's the purpose of it, to keep it out of the CPCN process at the Public Service Commission. So I think what was happening, and I didn't work on this, so I don't want to speak for other folks, but I think they were trying to promote community solar, because I heard a lot of folks come in and saying, I want solar, but I can't build it, for whatever reason. The roof isn't structurally sound, or I have shade, too much shading or something like that, and they listened to the public, and they wanted to come up with a pilot project to see, if we do this at a scale that doesn't trigger the CPCN, what's going to happen. That's why it's a pilot project. That's more of an MEA
We're
project.
getting hit to something, our immediate area, we've got 5 of the 2 megawatt ones, and, we account for over half of the roster for BGA. And Anne Arundel's not half of the population, probably not half of the electricity use. So it's just an area they really come into quickly. I definitely want this back.
Actually, to put it clearly in perspective, Eastern Shore can't get harder than anyone. There's both solar or Eastern Shore than anywhere else. There's quite a bit out in Washington County as well. And some people look at Frederick County, but they put that really it's the Eastern Shore when it comes to large utility scale solar. I have all those.
So, can I just ask, what would be the best way, you all, I think, need to have a fairly intense conversation about options and so on. No, it's good, because I know that's why you're here. I just want to be able to get through the rest of the information for the rest of the people too, but I think if you could figure out a way to get advice and counsel on which steps make sense for which projects, because I think the community solar, I think you're right, because it was taken out of the formal PSC review process, people have to apply for community solar to become what's called a subscriber organization, to be able to build one. And when they do that, they apply to the PSC, and they basically say where they're going to build the project, which category it falls in, and how big it's going to be, kind of thing. But they don't have the more detailed review that you would get with a certificate of certificate of public convenience necessity. So that's been an oversight, I think, in the community solar process. I think you still have some leverage, because it is so new and none of this has really been built yet, to at least while you're reconsidering your local zoning, which I think is where you're going with this, to ask the county officials or the PSC to ask the developers to apply appropriate, screening, whatever, apply the zoning regs that you would like to have it make sense. Because the zoning obviously was not done taking into consideration the fact that these things were going to happen. So in a way, you're behind the curve. Montgomery County's even further behind the curve, actually.
And Queen Anne's County is ahead of the curve, so they just proposed new regulations or zoning requirements for solar.
Who did?
Haven't passed
Queen
yet,
Anne.
Who?
but Queen Anne's County.
Queen Anne's, yeah.
And that's, I'm working with them, on site.
But that's where, and so, I don't know, can you guys figure out a way to follow up on the suggestion? Because I think this is a great connection. And no, I don't want you to, I just want to be able to get to where we need to get to by the end and let you all go home. But this is a really, I'm great that you're all here together because I think it's a very productive opportunity to maybe figure out some concrete next steps.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I bring any business cards, but, obviously, I work for the public, and our program is willing to sit down with any community group at any time, right? Obviously, we can schedule.
You have no business cards.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, put your
There's one
information away.
aspect that we have not talked about, and is with regard to Anne Arundel County. And that's that Anne Arundel County has made a distinction that a local government, in our case, is any organization that has a special taxing district. And as a special benefit district, you are a special taxing district. So what happens in Anne Arundel County is basically the county has been ignoring the fact that every homeowners association south of Annapolis, south of Route 50, in other words, we're talking South County, is an independent government.
Wow.
And as an independent
So-
government, you can apply for grants. It says incorporated areas, but there's this lovely little loophole that he filed through county code that all of a sudden says, oop, but if you're in special taxing district, the state of Maryland collects that money for all special benefit districts. Therefore, you are an independent government because you are collecting taxes on the citizens who are residents within your taxation district. And with the upcoming, and sorry, this is going to kind of reach here, but we are looking at the general development plan is coming back up. And with that, we can establish that we want to be a green energy, have goals, and also through the special benefit districts, enforce it on our communities.
And that's to flag that opportunity in various counties at different times are coming up onto their future kind of strategies and plans. And most of those do not include the thinking about how we're going to get to a clean energy environment, but they should, because that implies these issues we're talking about. And so that's another chance to engage. It's not going to solve your immediate problem. I think that you may be, if you could continue,
February
make that part of this
2018
discussion. I don't
is our date
quite
with the
get the
GDP.
homeowners association thing, fortunately. Yeah.
One thing that they did, the county council did over the past 6 months to a year, is they had a advisory group put together to discuss what should be in a ancillary area in the county's agricultural area, so that people could get additional additional income from farm-related activities on the site, and they had very extended discussions of that with all the interested parties involved. And I think, and it's still finishing up some of the details, but I think that would be a way to get people who have different perspectives of the problem together to come up with something that everybody can live with. Because I think that that's really an arbitrary saying no or
yes.
We're going to put them where we want to.
Right.
Neither one is a good solution. So that's
agreed. Let us
hopefully
finish.
The Sierra Club is going to try and promote with the legislature and the more interested parties we can get to head off the usual conflicts that we have.
Yeah, okay. So let's just finish running through this stuff, and then we're going to get to agriculture, which is actually the hot ticket item. So we're at Blair.
Okay, Brad? You're Brad, right? Okay, just wanted to make sure. I don't want to just, ignore what you said and run through things like glare and property value and some of these things. I mean, I think we do need to run through them, but, your issue is important because it sounds like one of the things that you've got to deal with is the fact that you've got a whole lot of stuff going on all in one place. And one of the things that Al dug up is that there's so many different regulations in the various counties that what we would ideally like to do here is come up with a plan of sorts that say these are the kinds of things you need to look out for in your county when you're putting regulations together for solar siting. And it sounds to me like you've got one that's sort of a little bit bigger than some of these other issues. That one area is getting dumped on a lot. Whether it's from cell phone towers or whether it's from even.
Yeah, I don't think solar is considered industrial anymore, but now it's an industrial center with that, with next to the landfill.
So I think the other thing to remember, you have an election that process is starting like now. And so your issues, I think, whoever you vote for locally, because I actually went on Google Earth and looked at your site, and I saw that retaining pond or whatever thing it is, and it is just right below and off to the side a little bit, and couldn't see the cell phone towers, but I mean, you have a legitimate claim on your elected official to say, hey, are you watching out for us or what? So so I mean, this is where this is county by county, but I think it's great to have a resource, at the center that can help guide you in terms of thinking about what you can do now and what you need to do with the next version of zoning and what you need to do in the next long-term plan. And this is why, essentially, that's why we're doing this talking, is to let you all know that this is an opportunity. If we do believe in clean renewable energy and we want to get there, but we want to get there in a way that takes all of these concerns into consideration, then we've got to get involved. That's all there's to it. Yeah.
I know you want to get back on track. I'm really sorry for doing this, but
no, you're not. That's okay. Right.
There's some very real projects that are coming in. They're very real local concerns with this too. My question for you is, and anybody, does anybody look at the scale of this overall? Like, not just what's happening next year, but if you're getting to your goals of 20%, 50%, whatever it may be, just how many acres is that?
Yeah, if we actually get through the slide, I'll answer your question.
Okay.
It's in there.
All right. Slide, okay.
All right.
Glare.
Yeah, another issue we've been hearing about is glare, and this one is sort of surprised me because basically solar cells are absorbing light, they're not reflecting it, and as Al pointed out in one of the earlier slides, the mirror portions are not what we're going to be seeing here in Maryland. At least that's what we've been told.
Seems like you have two kinds of panels out here. Some older panels at the bottom that are reflective, and the newer ones, basically, if you just look at them in the daylight, are meant to be non-reflective. They're black, but they're not. They don't shine, and that's the way solar panels are being built now. Try this one.
Hey, Al, real quick, solar cells themselves, individual cells, they're designed to be anti-reflective. They go through an acid wash process, and they have peaks and valleys, so the sunlight is designed to stay inside the cell. The glass on top is also designed to be anti-reflective. You got to keep in mind that there's airports that use solar panels. There are big solar arrays outside of airports. So the FAA wouldn't allow it if there was any kind of significant danger there.
A solar panel would be stupid if it reflected light because it's supposed to absorb the light and turn it into electricity. So, but the technology, that's the way it is now.
But like the viewscapes, this is something that can be handled with your local regulations, because they should have barriers around them that are visual barriers, so that you're not seeing them from your home, from the road.
Right.
That's quite possible to get into place.
Property value?
Property value. Property value. Well, you found something in Oregon, didn't you?
Yeah, there are actually some studies that were done long term in a couple of places, Oregon being one of them, where there's been larger solar arrays out there for years. And there has been no negative effect on property values. Actually, rooftop solar, depends on the community, actually
Kind of it.
adds value.
I used to finance houses, so I'm small now.
In Europe, there are people actually feel better about living close to a locally produced clean renewable energy source, and that actually enhances property values. That culture change hasn't happened here yet, but there has been no negative effect. Runoff, this is another zoning issue, actually.
Right, runoff and, I think that the next one is local flora and
Local.
fauna, and those we're going to be looking at in some slides coming up.
Yeah, and you've got like tree conservation laws that have to be followed. You've got, for runoff, any decent zoning would specify a minimum, like some gravel and this confirmation with the Stormwater Protection Act and so on and so forth. There are better ways to do it. We're going to talk about those a little bit at the end. But again, this is something that can be constructed at the local level. And then,
We are encouraging pollinator habitat.
Yep, we're getting there.
Surrounding them.
We're getting there. We'll get there.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Yep. Yep. Actually, there's a law. Doesn't make you do
Just a quick
it.
question, could you sort of quantify how important these various things are on sort of a large view of it? I mean, are 80% of the problems of viewscapes or 20% or?
No, we've heard all of these things, and it was interesting because when Phil mentioned, I think that the people said, "Oh, those are ugly," but you could put some trees in front of them, and then they wouldn't have to worry about it. But not so close that you don't get the sun. These are all incidental until you get to the bottom one. The bottom one, the use of agricultural land as in general, or the use of open land, open land areas, has really turned out to be the hot button issue. So, I mean, we were seeing headlines like this, right? Not just out of the Eastern Shore, but basically asking the question. People were concerned that this stuff is going to be everywhere, or it's going to be in places where we don't want it. It's going to be right in that historic. It's going to be an Antietam battlefield or whatever. This is that concern is, in a sense, what started the movement at the different county levels, which is what started us trying to figure out how to be rational about this whole thing. But like the bottom one says, should solar projects on farmland even exist? So we've already come to the conclusion that we don't have enough other places, rooftops, brownfields, landfills, and parking lots, to do everything that we need to do. So land, which is also, I hate to say it, but it's also the more economical place to build, and it's the only place where you can get big enough to get those economies of scale. Economy isn't everything, but economy is important, particularly like for low-income households who, 6 cents per kilowatt hour power for low-income households would be a great boon. And so, we need to keep that in the equation.
Is that a wind tower back there?
Yes, it is.
So you can use farmland, you can use wind on, I think they're not mutually exclusive. Again, every tool in the toolbox to get to 100%. I think if you have farmland like this, you should have wind towers, and then you can farm it and have wind and generate electricity. So.
Sure. All right. This is the problem, though. This agricultural land issue or the open land issue, shall we say, has become it, because what we found, and there now has, because your department, the Department of Natural Resources, maybe it was you, put together all of the zoning from all of our 24 counties and whatever Baltimore City is, that affect clean renewable energy, wind or solar. Guess how many pages it is? 294 pages, of which 290 are the zoning codes themselves. Every county is different. And so we have got, he's probably got battle scars to prove this. We have got a crazy quilt of different ways of thinking about this. And in many cases, what happened is the local concerns that arose as a project that wasn't well managed came online. And so people went to their council and they got a moratorium, or they got something very restrictive. So for example, Baltimore County, where Lynn lives, basically came out, they put a moratorium on first, and then they said, okay, for now, and maybe forever, they didn't stipulate that was an endpoint, nothing bigger than 2 megawatts. So the possibility of any economies of scale, and they even limited the number that you could build in the county. And so those are going to be little projects that will serve a few people but won't really meet the county's own needs, frankly, and they've got a coal-fired power plant. Frederick County did it a little differently. They said size limited to 10% of a land parcel, but the average farm in Frederick County is about 140 acres, 139 actually. So the average 10% would be 14 acres. That again gets you down to the 2 or 2.5 megawatt size, nothing bigger. Montgomery County hasn't even gotten into the 21st century yet. Their zoning only says that the only solar you can build is solar that is associated with the property that it's built on, and not for putting electrons out into the grid. So they haven't even got there yet, and there are a lot of people there that would like to see renewable energy, and a lot of people that are going to need it eventually. On the other hand, you've got places where the regulations are inadequate. Somerset County does not have any real solar-related regulations, and so down there, someone is in the process, I believe, of actually building a 150 megawatt project, which is quite big. And it's because the land is relatively inexpensive. There's no real restrictions. And the problem that's going to happen there is after that one project, people are going to go running and say, we don't want any more of the solar stuff down here, and that's going to shut it down. And that's what's been happening county after county. So because this lack of a kind of a rational sense of how we should manage this is actually going to keep us from being able to get to that clean energy future that we need. And so that's why we're trying to think this one through. Now, your answer. Okay, farmland and solar. And these data come from two places, USDA and that institute that I talked about, the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research, which is our local think tank on energy. Okay, so USDA, we have just over 2 million acres of farmland, of which USDA classifies 800,000 as prime, what some people would call tillable, I guess. If we wanted to have 100% clean energy in Maryland, and take a little bit from outside, but basically IER for the jobs, the economic development, all the other aspects, figures we need 14,000 megawatts of solar and about the same amount of offshore wind, plus some imported wind from outside. And more than half of that solar, we're saying, would need to be on land. After we deal with all the rooftops, the brownfields, and the other options that are out there. That's 8,400 megawatts. If you use that number, 5 to 6 acres per megawatt, you come up with 8,400 megawatts is 50,000 acres. 50,000 acres is 2.5%, but let's say under 3% of all the agricultural land in Maryland is what we need to have 100% clean energy. 3%. So the real issue again becomes what land is going to be the land that we decide it's okay to build on, and which not. If we took away the whole 800,000 acres of prime, for example, it becomes like 4.3%. And so, that's the kind of big picture thing I think you were thinking about. There's also, IER did this also. If you look at the current value of corn and the current lease value for corn, say you have 100 acres and it's all in corn. If you took 10% of that land and you leased it for solar at the going lease rate, which is about $1,000 an acre, that farmer would have their total income. And that total income would be there even if there was a drought and the crops failed, or the prices go up and the prices go down, corn loses its subsidy, whatever. That income would be there. What that then would do, she, whatever, can plant the other 90% in corn if they want to. They like corn. But maybe they could do something that was economically a little better, but a little riskier if it didn't work, like heirloom tomatoes or something, I don't know. Or organic farming. Or, think about this, carbon sequestering sustainable agriculture. Things that are riskier, but they've got their base income there. The president of the Farm Bureau in Frederick, a guy named Robert Ramser, a great guy, and I had a long conversation. He said, there are some other farmers out there like me that pretty soon aren't going to be able to farm. We don't have 401ks. So if we had some income from our land, that would be a good thing. So all of these factors need to be thought of as we kind of figure out what's the right thing to do about this mix of solar and land. And then there's Lynn's favorites.
My favorites, yes, I love these. These are my favorite slides. The co-location ones. This one is some farming where the crops need a little bit of shade. And so we're seeing what looks like some kale in there. I'm not a farmer myself.
That's kale,
yeah. But it looks pretty good. And so this certainly works to take away some of that ugliness, I think. I don't think they're ugly to begin with, but it adds something, there's value here. There's value in farming under these.
Next,
Sure.
This system is, from my experience dealing with community solar and how it works. This is a privately owned system. This is owned by a farmer, and that's why he can do that. Within the community solar program, I, as a developer, I developed the system. We manage the installation. That lease is then sold to a financial company. They actually own it. They put a fence around it and they lock the gate. It's maintained by them, the grass is cut by them, but the farmer does not have the ability to do that.
But you could. Not the way the rules are written right now,
Not the way the
but
rules
you
are written
could.
right now, they cannot, because
But you could.
the utility and the owner of that solar array does not want people, animals in there. Because I've also seen talk about letting goats run the grass.
You mean like that?
Yeah, like that.
Yeah.
But
It's done.
But it within the confines right now, the way it's done, it doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, this has been done on, this is obviously a larger scale project. The advantage of this is that if you're going to build on land, well, for solar, and it's true for wind also, 80% of your cost is the upfront cost of building the thing, right? The other 20% is, a little of admin and billing and stuff like that, but it's mostly operations and maintenance. And so operations and maintenance for ground-based stuff involves mowing, right? And mowing,
And herbicides. And herbicides.
And herbicides, right? So if you were to mow, you're not going to do that with a hand mower. So you have to have a tractor. And so a tractor needs wider rows, wider spacing between the panels, which is inefficient use of the land. And then it goes through burning fossil fuel while it mows. So in some places, they've actually done this. They've actually paid local farmers, the solar guys, the big financer people who own these things, they don't want to own sheep. They just rent the sheep, and they let the sheep graze in there. But this is something else. This is again from NREL that has been done. And then this one, who brought there? Lynn.
Pollinator friendly one, yay. Yeah, this one's great, I love this one. This is, what we found is there are places, I think Minnesota has a really, really good book on what you can do around a solar facility, and in terms of land use like this. This happens to be pollinator friendly, but native plants, just butterfly gardens, things that we want to see grow, the really good environmental stuff. It's an opportunity to make this happen. Did you have
Yeah.
something specific?
Well, just in Minnesota, actually, they've shown that it's not just the pollinators here, but the farms in the area actually benefit from having a greater density of pollinators from planting native grasses and native wildflowers mixed together. And there is no maintenance attached to this. This is self-sustaining. And as Lynn said, these plants, I don't have the plant picture, but the grass that people plant has roots about this deep. These native plants and native grasses tend to have roots that go down several feet. They're excellent as runoff protection. They keep the land intact. And in this case, they attract pollinators. Actually, last legislative session, your legislators, hooray, right, enacted Senate Bill 1158, sorry, which asked the University of Maryland to take this experience and define what in Maryland would constitute a pollinator-friendly solar project. And actually in Frederick County, there is one large project that made it in before they changed their regulations. And that one is going to be made pollinator-friendly. And we're all gonna watch that because it is something that we can all learn from and have a documented experience. But the experience out in the Midwest is that this is a value-added proposition for agriculture by doing this. And the other thing about solar is no traffic, no pollution. It has a lot of benefits over other kinds of development that could happen. Not that we're pushing it, right?
So that bill actually required our program to come up with a certification program, which we're working on right now. And I don't think the core biologist in our program, named Bob Sadinsky, was really pushing this. So we're working on that voluntary certification program.
Yeah, and what that does is it's going to give you like something, again, if it's consistent with all your other zoning requirements that you all develop, it gives you essentially a branding, something you can say, this is a good thing. We've worked to make this a net positive.
And I just want to say one other thing. The upfront cost of pollinator habitat is a little bit higher than just regular vegetation, your typical vegetation. But in the long run, it's actually more costs. You take advantage of not mowing it so much, so it's actually cost savings in the long run.
There's those nasty economics again. All right.
So I want to add to that. So we haven't had any developers really say no to this. We're trying to encourage it, and most developers say yes, we'll do it. They voluntarily, voluntarily in the program they do this.
And the one thing that we would really love to see from the developers is to have them be as user-friendly as possible to the community, because otherwise the next one's not going to happen. And that's what we're already hearing, right? And so there's something in it for them as well. So out of all this is the punchline, right? We've taken all of what we've been able to find out so far, listening to folks like you and so on, and come up with right now what we think would be the elements of a good local solar policy. So first thing is that it promotes those other places that are agricultural land, the brownfields, the landfills, appropriate public lands. Rooftops is a whole separate issue. That's a separate zoning issue that would be separate, but obviously we encourage rooftops as well. And then for projects that end up on land, make sure that there are adequate setbacks from property boundaries to respect those boundaries, visual screening, fencing and protection, tree conservation, runoff protection. That can all be stipulated. That's something that you all get to do at the county by county level, right? And then define what land should be out of play. And that becomes a very important local discussion, where for example, I live in Montgomery County. The top third, north and northwest of Montgomery County, is something called the Agricultural Reserve, where there are very intense zoning development restrictions to maintain both farming and, quote, the farming way of life. Okay. Should all of that be off bounds to solar development? Maybe. I'm not going to answer that for Montgomery County. But then again, maybe there are farmers in there like the old guy that doesn't have a 401k that could benefit from having that income stream or some protection from the vagaries of crop prices and so on. So that's a discussion that can be had at the local level, listening to the different voices and coming up with the right answer. You don't want it on historic places. What about people that have conservation easements? Can they put solar on or not? Local decision, right? Once that's done, Sierra Club really believes that it's not the right thing because the technology is going to change. There are lots of things that are going to evolve. Individual project size limits are probably not the business of zoning. If the county decides they want to set a cap on total amount of agricultural land to be developed for solar, that's something that might make sense based on those calculations that we saw earlier. But it's going to vary county by county. How much rooftop do you have? How many brownfields do you have? How much land would you need? And how much do you want to import from somewhere else?
Where do you guys stand on percent of particular properties, a parcel of land? Like you saw, Frederick County had like a certain
Yeah,
percentage
the
of
problem with
trees.
that is, in Maryland, this is not Ponderosa. So, you get these, that would be very, that turns out in practice to be very restrictive, and they knew that when they did it.
But then
It was-
that
that was
doesn't support the farmer, that replaces the farmer.
That's, he wants his 401K and he doesn't want to grow anything.
Well, it doesn't mean, if he only has 14 acres and he sells the whole thing, then he gets that income. If he, if he has 100 acres, she, whatever, and they do 10% or something, then, it could vary. I think you can, but the problem with restricting, if you restrict parcel size, you're effectively restricting project size. And that may or may not make sense. I mean, there are places, I was just out in Frederick County and then I was out in Carroll County. And there are large pieces of land out there where, once you've driven through it, you don't see it from anywhere. And so, if they put up solar out there and put some trees along the road, you'd never know that it was there. But it's bigger than 14 acres by far. So, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Al, I noticed that in all of this, we are limiting our conversation to land. So I just want to inquire and share that Maryland, thanks to Professor Bruning over at the Naval Academy, you can put solar arrays on piers. And if we're talking about an area like Deal, there are more boats in Deal than there are homes in Deal. And that's not a joke. And there are more marinas that house more boats in Deal than there are homes in Deal. So that's a whole nother opportunity for people.
Yeah, I mean, I think,
Water as an
I haven't
asset.
looked into that. There's actually such a thing as floating solar, for that matter.
Literally.
You wouldn't do it on Chesapeake Bay, you'd do it on a reservoir or something sheltered. And there are many smaller variations. I don't think that Maryland is gonna meet all of its clean energy needs from piers, but for boat owners who wanna keep their batteries charged or run some power to their house, it might make sense. I mean, we have no objection with that, just, we're kind of dealing with the big picture issues, and the biggest of the big picture, I mean, rooftop is a big picture, that should happen. And there is zoning and permitting, it's very different actually for building on a building. And so we haven't seen any problems with that, except with community solar, because it's so expensive to get all the things you need to be able to apply for a permit to build on a roof. That becomes a real obstacle if in a pilot program you don't know you're gonna get in. So you invest $100,000 to do all the development work and then you don't get into the queue. But when this is no longer a pilot program, that won't pertain. But we're totally pro rooftop. We're totally pro landfills and brownfields and other public lands and any of these other things that can fill up part of the need, like the electric vehicle stations that have the solar panel with them. That's coming. And so we add need through having electric vehicles, which we want to move to, but we have a way of dealing with that. So all of that is good. It's the land issue that has become, like these folks over here, building it somewhere on some property has become the hot button issue. And that's where we get the 290 pages of crazy quilt regulations. I want to make the last 2 points though in this, because this should be in your local regulations. What constitutes adequate notification? And an adequate hearing. I mean, you don't want to have 10 hearings, that's not appropriate. But, for the people that live nearby, for the community at large, for the chance to express your opinion on the whole set of regulations. But by the time you get to the hearing, you shouldn't be fighting the regulations. You should be talking about the specific project. Right now, we find ourselves in this mix where we're talking about the regulations weren't fair. And so what we need to do is to move towards good regulations. And that's what we're trying to help with here.
And just increase that from one public meeting to 2.
You did?
We did.
Okay.
Well, we asked the Public Service Commission to do it and they have agreed. So we used to do one public meeting. And unfortunately, it was kind of towards the end of the project, but the Public Service Commission was right before they ruled on the case. Now we're trying to do one a little earlier in the process so that we can address before we file, because remember, this is a legal case. So before, we go through discovery. So we felt like we needed another public meeting so we could address the community's concerns during discovery, and so we could file.
That's what we need.
Is that
When you say adequate and timely, I think these folks over here would say timely means much earlier than what happened
Yeah.
in their case.
For all projects now in Anne Arundel County, there is a requirement for a public meeting. Submittal of a proposed development proposal. And some developers are much more attuned to applying the spirit of the project and some more to just a letter. But I think it generally has worked out well for trying, at least give an opportunity to neighboring property owners and other individuals to get some basic ideas of what the project is about and to express their concerns before a project is
But
formally
early,
submitted.
I think what you're hearing from these folks over here is it wasn't early enough.
No, we haven't had, and we weren't given a public meeting before they entered their preliminary plans to the county because they were in a rush to meet the community solar deadline on August 3rd. So they told us on September 27th and said, sorry, we already turned it in because of the deadline. And we were told by the county when we were giving feedback that we're missing 3 things. We're missing a community meeting, we're missing trees for historic, to prevent views from historic homes and scenic roads.
But I thought yours was the big project, not the community project. Yours is,
He has both.
you have both. Wow. But again, I think, you are the ones, if I go to Howard County or, to Carroll County, there are going to be people that are potentially facing the same, but similar, but different. So for Anne Arundel, you all have the opportunity to shape this discussion now. I mean, I think you have a basis for making some noise about the projects that you don't think went through the right steps. You have the opportunity to influence your own zoning. You have the opportunity to make this an election issue, particularly this longer term planning for how's the county going to develop. If we want to get off fossil fuels, we want to get off nuclear, how are we going to get there? And that's going to be, there needs to be a state plan too. But counties are they're all different. And so that's all basically, the reason we're putting all this information out here is basically to say, go for it. This is going to continue to be local issues because the characteristics of the counties are different enough that
That why it would be so important for you to make sure that you sign up even before, or if you haven't done it before, on your way out, sign up and give us your name and your email address, so we can let you, make you aware of steps as we go along in this process, because we really would hope to try and do a more rational process of sometimes occurs with new developments. So I urge you all to make sure that you sign up so we're able to contact you and get your input as things go along.
So we're a little over time.
Yeah.
I appreciate the chance, this has been a really great discussion, particularly because we've got some real local case issues here. I'm happy to stay longer and talk longer, but some of you want to go. The only thing I would ask is if you would be willing, we at Sierra have decided that there's actually a fair amount happening in the solar realm, and it's moving fairly fast. So we're developing something we're calling the Maryland Sierra Solar Forum, otherwise known as the Solar Forum, which is basically meant to be better than a listserv. The idea is what we'd like to have over the coming months is some webinars that people can watch and ask questions, some conference calls where people can raise issues and discuss things. We'll pump out some information and articles on important developments as they happen. For example, the International Trade Commission is making a decision now that's going to affect the cost of solar panels.
Yeah. Right.
And that in Maryland, where the recs aren't very valuable, the market is very tenuous. And so what effect that's going to have, there'll be some analysis of that. So what we'd like to do is kind of keep this topic alive with you And if you don't mind, unless you want to opt out, if we could take a copy of that list and just invite you to participate in this solar forum. And we would be happy to have you as part of it.
But that list is only for people who are new, right? Yeah, so all the other climate stewards would not be on that list.
All right, well, if you can give us a list of.
All right.
All right. We'll include you. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know we're running over, but this is really important for our program, and it goes to the point of the public notification. So, unfortunately, the requirement right now is to post a notice in a local newspaper, and frankly, who reads the newspaper anymore? I certainly don't. So we're struggling with this internally, trying to figure out how we notify the communities and get people out to the public meetings and to intervene in the process. I'm looking for advice from folks like you. One thing that we've come up with that we haven't implemented yet, but we're kind of considering is, typically when someone builds a housing community, they have to post one of these big boards right on the site that says, it's a notice, and it's a zoning hearing and all that kind of stuff. We don't do that in energy projects in the state. But the local newspapers, we hear this about every meeting we go to. We didn't know this was happening because it's posted in the local newspaper. Unfortunately, no one reads. So does anyone in the room have any suggestions on how to get the word out? Because we're certainly listening to that.
Well, one thing, these are, two suggestions, one of which is the county has a website and work with them to have a solar application sort of thing, so when major projects come in, which they have to put on the website anyway.
Yes.
You could key them into it.
And Queen Anne's County is doing
The other thing is, we now have quite a few Facebook activities and other alternative media sites that I think would be happy to take any notice that you have, any information you want to get out, and put it on their website. Because I think, for the younger generation, that's definitely the way they go. When you get up to my generation, be more, email is probably the best we can do. We can FaceTime, so I think it's sort of a two-pronged approach that you need on these things, but we'd be happy to work with you to develop some sort of mechanism, making sure that we have information.
How about all of you that have been caught up in this? What would you have seen in advance? I mean, if there were some, how about the big sign? Would that have worked?
A big sign would help, because we're in the same situation where we're not part of the larger homeowners association. And so we're basically around 50 or 60 homes that are spread over several miles over in Millersville, and a couple of farms are over there. We have no way of knowing. We'll find trucks there one day, and all of a sudden they're doing major work on underground lines. And unless there's a large sign that says, notice this is being parceled out, we're about ready to subdivide, you're given a chance to go and talk about that, we don't know it. And we just went to a county meeting the other night where the notices went to people who were directly affected because it was right behind their house or right across the street. But we don't know about it because only those homes were notified on the opposite side. But again, we don't have that, since we have a county way of government, we don't have homeowners that are directly being contacted as large associations. And we were told by our delegate, by the way, it wouldn't be a bad idea if you became one, so you'd have some teeth, when you go to county meetings. So yes, signs, big signs.
You need a couple locations, it sounds like, really.
A large truck with a Public Service Utilities Commission on it with a big blinking sign. We're about to come into phase. No, we will see lights, we'll see blinking lights.
And you're talking about
Yeah.
solar power to have power.
It's all about
Anything over.
Utility scale power.
Right, power.
So,
but she's talking about a 2 megawatt, which is a developer putting in. They don't want anyone to know about anything going on.
No,
We do. We have that. Well, people that contacted me said, I tried using the white pages, and didn't get a hold of anyone, so
Yeah.
I can't,
They really worked
They worked you guys over. Everywhere I've done it, I have to go to a planning board meeting where the public is invited, they're notified, some by mail, others by signage, others by door to door. We're doing one at Susquehanna University in Pennsylvania. And they literally went door to door to let people know what was gonna happen. And that this is where it was gonna be, you can come and talk about it. I did one in Cecil County. They notified, put a sign up. We had, it was rural farmland. They had 8 people, I think it was, came and spoke against this project. The board voted on it, it voted to a tie, had to go to the appeals hearing, and they must have brought out everybody within a mile, came and spoke out against it. To a person, everybody said, I like solar, I'm in favor of solar, it's a good project, not here. And with that, the hearing council said, sorry, next project.
That's why, just to not end on such a negative note, that's why we need good processes. Because if everybody says not here, guess what? It's not gonna be anywhere, you know? And so if we're stuck, it's what Lynn said at the beginning. We've got these two things. We know we're facing climate change. We know that Annapolis periodically floods. You know, we know that the storms are happening and the fires out west. I've got people who live in Santa Rosa and actually had to leave their homes and go, you know, and they got out, but in the middle of the night. But so, you know, these things are happening. We know these things are happening. We're aware of this stuff. And so we know that we need to make this move.
I appreciate that message. That's important. You know, the NIMBY, not in my backyard issue really is unfortunately driving a lot of this. And that's unfortunate, I think, because I'm a big, you know, a supporter of renewable energy. And, you know, we want solar farms to come into Maryland, but we want them to be sited properly. And, you know, it's got to be in someone's backyard, unfortunately. But there's ways to mitigate that, you know, visual screening, glare analysis. There's work that we can do to make sure these projects minimize their impact on the community.
But
So we're beyond
necessarily.
quarter after 9, and I want to honor our time. So let me suggest we give our speakers a hand. And speaking of flooding, I mentioned the Saturday Earth program at the Key School. If you want more information about any of these, come and see me later this evening. The Candidates Forum is on Wednesday, the 25th, and flooding. On Thursday, April 26th, we're co-sponsoring with Café Scientifique a presentation on sea level rise, tidal flooding, and the future exposure on America's coast. And we know we're in a very vulnerable area right here because of not only sea level rise, but subsidence as well. So that's going to be Thursday, the 26th at 49 West.
What
Café
time?
Scientifique, the time is 6:30. Okay, so several people have offered to stay, and that's great. Some of us need to reshape this room and put it back in a different configuration. There's the lobby to talk. There are also rooms along that hallway. There's an office. There's a library. Feel free to gather in any of those to continue your conversation, okay? Thank you for such a spirited discussion.
Can I just ask one thing?
Yeah.
I didn't bring a lot of these because I don't think it's something everybody wants to do. But we basically took this concept and turned it into something we call a county solar regulation assessment tool, beta version, right? And so what it basically does is let you go to that 290-page document, which is online, click on Anne Arundel, and look at the regulations, and then fill out on here what they say about these different things, from screening to land use to public notification, all this stuff. So it's a great learning exercise, but also when you start talking with your council people, it's something that maybe might be useful. So if anybody wants one, I got 4.